Alright, today we're going to be doing some trigonometry to figure out some missing things in the geometry problem. First, let's take this problem and realize we want to put the information in the picture. So they say the measure of angle A is 48 degrees. And here's a big indicator that we need to use trigonometry to figure out some of this. First off, this is definitely a right triangle. Everything we're going to be doing today deals with right triangles and right triangle trigonometry. But notice, now that we know that the measure of angle A is 48 degrees, this is not a 45, 45, 90 right triangle, nor is it a 30, 60, 90 right triangle. So we can't do any of them special tricks to know, like if they give you the short leg, you can find the long leg by doing so, and etc. They know that the measure of angle A is 48 degrees. Little a, that's a lowercase letter, is 9. Little a is defined to be the side that's across from capital A. So since this is a capital A, the side across from that is called little a. And they want me to find little c, which is across from a capital C. So notice that this is a right triangle, but you do not have both sides, to where you can't do the Pythagorean theorem to figure out the missing side length. And it's not 45, 45, 90 or 30, 60, 90, so we're going to use trigonometry to figure that out. Okay, and let me get you some basics here. There's 3 buttons on your calculator: sine, cosine, and tangent. Okay, sine, cosine, and tangent. You'll see those 3 buttons right here: sine, cosine, and tangent, on my calculator. So I want to use those, but let's get some basic information first. Sine is really spelled S-I-N-E. Cosine is really spelled like this, and tangent, those are just abbreviations. Okay, this magic word right here, SOHCAHTOA. SOHCAHTOA is the magic word today that tells us how these trig functions work. Sounds kind of confusing right now, but 3 syllables, separate them all out: SOHCAHTOA, where S stands for sine, C stands for cosine, if I could spell, and T stands for tangent. So 3 syllables, 3 different trig functions, and O is going to stand for opposite. I'll explain all this here in a moment. A is going to stand for adjacent. Like, for an example, like my room and Mr. Dreyer's room are adjacent rooms because they're touching each other. Adjacent means they're basically touching each other. And H is going to stand for hypotenuse. Okay, so out of these letters that are left over, O, A, and H, it's all about opposite, adjacent, and hypotenuse. Okay, so here's what we want to do. To do this first problem, let's first write the word SOHCAHTOA at the top of our page. And if you can't spell it right, then you won't be able to use it right, but SOHCAHTOA. Once we have all this information in our picture, we want to figure out what trig function to use by letting SOHCAHTOA help us. So what we do is we're going to focus all of our attention around the angle measure that they give us. That's not the 90-degree angle. They give me the 48, so we're going to focus all our attention around that. First thing I want to know is 9, the opposite, adjacent, or the hypotenuse compared to the 48. Now hopefully you can eliminate one of those right away, that 9 is not the hypotenuse, because hypotenuse is across from the 90-degree angle. So 48, is that opposite the, 9, is that opposite the 48 or adjacent to it? Since this side is not touching that 48 degree at all, that's the opposite side. That's opposite. So put OPP out there on your paper. So we figured out that 9 is opposite, and now C, since that's across from the 90, isn't that the hypotenuse? Put a little HYP. So they gave me 48-degree angle. I have the opposite side and the hypotenuse. Now I want to use SOHCAHTOA to figure out which trig function I want to use. Should I use sine, cosine, or tangent? Since I have the opposite and the hypotenuse, basically an O and an H, isn't that right here? O and H. That's the sine function. So SOHCAHTOA told me I want to use the sine function. So let's write an equation. First thing we'll do is we'll write the same abbreviation that you see on your calculator, the sine. And now we want to continue writing. What we put next to the trig function every single time is the angle measure. So the angle measure we're dealing with is 48. So the sine of 48 will equal. And now according to SOHCAHTOA, what we need over here is a fraction. And SOHCAHTOA is written in correct order. Sine is defined to be opposite over hypotenuse. It's always the first over the second. Opposite over hypotenuse. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. Tangent is opposite over adjacent. So I want to set up a fraction. The first variable, first letter is the numerator, second letter is the denominator, so I want to do opposite over hypotenuse. So since opposite is 9 and the hypotenuse is c, I have my fraction said the sine of the angle measure equals opposite over hypotenuse. Alright, now all we're trying to do is solve for c. Since c is in the denominator of a fraction, we can't have that. We don't like c downstairs, we want to make it go upstairs. So to get rid of this divide by c, I'm going to multiply both sides by c. And when I do that, I get c times the sine of 48 equals, those cancel each other out, 9. That's awesome. I'm trying to get c all by itself, and what you need to realize is that the sine of 48, that's one number right there. Okay, there's not just a 48 with some letters in front of it. The sine of 48 is actually itself a number. So all I have to do to get c all by itself, since there's a times sine of 48, is divide both sides by sine of 48 to where c is actually equal to 9 divided by the sine of 48. Alright, now all I have to do is punch this in my calculator. So let me go to my calculator, and the first thing you need to do is make sure your calculator is in the right mode. Hopefully you see a little DEG. If you have a graphing calculator, do you see this button mode right here? I'm going to bet that your mode is in radians right here. We need to hover down over that and make sure you hover over degrees and hit enter. We want our calculator to be in degree mode, and then quit out of that. So second, quit. Somehow. Oh, come on. Second, quit. There we go. So we're in degree mode. You can always check. Just hit sine of 30 real quick and see if it gives you 0.5, and that's good. Okay. If you're not in the correct mode, please bring your calculator in, and I will fix it for you. But here's what we needed to punch in. We needed to punch in 9 divided by sine of 48, so I'll just punch that straight in real quick. 9 divided by sine of 48, and close the parentheses, and you should get that. And that's our final answer, so we'll round that to the nearest tenth, about 12.1. So c is about 12.1. And hopefully that makes a little bit of sense that this side right here, since it's the hypotenuse, it does have to be bigger than 9 in this right triangle, but we just figured out with one angle measure and one side length, knowing that that was a 90, I guess, what one of the sides was by using trigonometry. So as confusing as that was, let's do that again. And I want to skip to some easier problems. So we're going to skip over this one right here. We're going to skip over this one. And please go to this problem on your practice sheet. And let's put this information in the picture. Measure of angle B is 28 degrees. Little b, which is located across from capital B, is 3. Find little a, put that in the picture. Now that I put all that in there, I want to figure out what trig function to use, so focus your attention around the angle that we're talking about. 3 is that opposite adjacent, or the hypotenuse. Since it is across from it, that is the opposite side, put the OPP. Little a is not the hypotenuse, so since isn't it touching the 28 degree angle and it's not the hypotenuse, so that is the adjacent sign, ADJ. So I'm dealing with opposite and adjacent. What trig function do I want to use? Sine, cosine, or tangent if I have opposite and adjacent? Well, that's this one right here, which is tangent. Make sure you write TAN, the abbreviation on your calculator. Don't write TOA. Okay, it's the tangent. And the angle measure always goes next to the trig function, and that will equal opposite over adjacent, the first one over the second one. So opposite over adjacent, 3 over a. I want to solve for a now. Since a is downstairs, we can't have a variable downstairs. Let's get rid of it by, instead of dividing by a, multiply both sides by a. And a times the tangent of 28 will equal 3, because those cancel each other out. Now divide both sides by the tangent of 28, and a equals 3 over the tangent of 28, which I can now punch into my calculator. 3 divided by the tangent of 28 equals about 5.6. So a is about 5.6. Lovely. Let's keep skipping around, and let's skip this one and go to that one. There's a typo on your paper. That only looks like the measure of angle A is 7. It's actually 70. So put all that information in the picture real quick. So measure of angle A, 70 degrees. Little c is 58. And find B, which is across from capital B. So focus your attention around this, and let's figure out what B is: opposite, adjacent, or the hypotenuse. B is definitely not the hypotenuse, but isn't this B right here touching the 70-degree angle? So that is adjacent to it, and 58 is the hypotenuse. So adjacent and hypotenuse tells me that I want to use the cosine of the angle measure equals adjacent over hypotenuse. There's my equation. Now I want to solve for B, but notice now B's upstairs. That is good. That's good. That's good. B's upstairs. So all we want to do is multiply both sides by 58 to get B all by itself. And B is about, let's just punch that in our calculator, 58 times the cosine of 70, and get about 19.8. So B is about 19.8. Rock on. So that's half the worksheet. Let's go back now and realize the problems that we skipped over. So all the way back to this first one, let's put the information in the picture. Little a is 18, little b is 22, and they want me to find the measure of angle B. Notice Pythagorean theorem is not going to help. I mean, sure, we could do it, and we could find that side length, but they don't want that side length. They want to know what's the measure of angle B, so put an arc mark in that. What they want you to find, we'll put an arc mark if it's an angle measure, and we focus all of our attention around this angle and realize that this is opposite it, and this is adjacent it. So the trig function I want to use, opposite and adjacent, is tangent of the angle measure. I don't know the angle measure, so what we're going to do is we're just going to put a capital B there, because that's what they want me to find, and that will equal opposite over adjacent, so 22 over 18. Alright, please don't try to reduce 22 over 18, because we're just punching all this stuff in our calculator, so why reduce when we don't have to? But do you notice we don't know the angle measure? So we've got a cool little thing here on our calculator. Do you see, here's sine, cosine, and tangent buttons, but above them as little second functions, there's sine to the -1, cosine to the -1, and tangent to the -1. Those are called inverse functions, and what inverse functions do is you'll learn a lot more about them next year, but they make things invert, you know, they pull the old switcheroony. So you can't just like get rid of the tan somehow by dividing or anything. This is just one number, so when you don't know the angle measure, we're going to do the inverse function. So we'll rewrite it as the tangent inverse, and when you do the inverse, those two guys switch places. The tangent inverse of 22 over 18 now will equal B. So the only time you do the inverse function is when you don't know the angle measure. So now all we have to do, since B is by itself in this blue equation, is punch that in. So I'll do second tangent to get that tangent inverse, and you got to have the 22 divided by 18 in parentheses if your calculator doesn't automatically put things in parentheses. Okay, and punch that in. And that's rounded to the nearest tenth, about 50.7. So since we found an angle measure, we'll write our final answer as the measure of angle B is approximately 50.7. Is that right? Yeah, 50.7, and then the label is degrees since that's an angle measure. All right, let's try again. Let's go to this problem. Little a, 27, little c, 35. Find the measure of angle B, so put an arc mark in there. And let's find out what trig function. So focusing around this angle, this guy is adjacent to it. This guy is the hypotenuse to it. So we want cosine. Now some people go, but this is touching it also, how come it's not adjacent? Well, it is adjacent to it, but since it's across from 90, it is the hypotenuse, so please realize that. Let's do cosine of the angle measure is adjacent over hypotenuse, so 27 over 35. I do not know the angle measure, so it's an inverse situation. We will now rewrite this as cosine inverse of switcheroo, 27 over 35 equaling B, and now just punch it in. The cosine inverse of 27 over 35 will equal about 39.5 degrees. So measure of angle B is approximately 39.5 degrees, or whatever our calculator said. Alright, one more. Little a is 300. Little b is 600. Find the measure of angle A, so arc mark. Trig function, this is opposite. This is adjacent to the A. Sorry, it's touching angle A. Right, focusing our attention around this. So tangent of the angle measure is opposite over adjacent. So I will do an inverse since I don't know the angle measure and make those things switch. 300 over 600 equals A, and then punch it in. The tangent inverse, 300 divided by 600 is about 26.6. So measure of angle A is about 26.6 degrees. That takes care of the practice worksheet. I did a couple others. So this is supposed to be a 90-degree angle, but I want to try this just to give you some more examples. So focusing our attention around the angle they give me. Little b is opposite that. This is the hypotenuse. So opposite and hypotenuse says do the sine of the angle measure, which is 40, equals b over 7. So I'm looking for b. This is not an inverse situation because I do know the angle measure. All I need to do is multiply both sides by 7 to get b all by itself. Since that's upstairs, that's good. So I will do that in my calculator. 7 times the sine of 40 equals about 4.5. So b is about 4.5. There we go. One more. Here's the angle they gave me. So A is opposite that, and 5 is touching it and is not the hypotenuse, so that's adjacent. The hypotenuse is down here. Right? So opposite and adjacent is tangent of the angle measure is opposite over adjacent. So 5 times tangent is 17. 5 times tangent 17. About 1.5. So A is about 1.5. Okie dokie. One more. Some people got confused on this one because it's like, well, if this is 3, this is 4, and this is a C, and they got an arc mark here, what do they want me to find? Well, you can find C real easy. 3, 4, 5, correct? But now to find A, people were like, what do you do? What trig function do you use? I know the opposite, the adjacent, and the hypotenuse. I know all 3 sides. Okay, so if you know all 3 sides, pick your trig function. What do you want to use? If you use the tangent of A, what should the tangent of A equal? 4 over 5, 5 over 4, 3 over 4, 4 over 3, 3 over 5, or 5 over 3. Well, tangent is opposite over adjacent. So opposite the A is 4, adjacent is the 3. So you would then do the tangent inverse of 4/3, since you didn't know the angle measure, to get A. If you wanted to do the sine of A, sine is opposite over hypotenuse, so the sine of A would be the opposite over the hypotenuse, and you do the sine inverse and you get the same number. So it's all about, if you know too much information, just do something. Figure out what you want to do. Alrighty, so if you had problems with your calculator, you didn't know anything, please let me fix that for you. And that is our video. Your homework is what I gave you, so have a good one.